how would someone like you have $25,000?
Can you imagine? They asked, how would someone like you have $25,000? The words that turned a routine banking transaction into a nightmare when successful businesswoman Bernice Hope walked into her own bank to withdraw money for her dying mother's medical care, only to find herself accused of armed robbery, surrounded by police, and fighting not just for her freedom, but for her very life. All because she committed the unforgivable crime of being black with money in America. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. Bernice Hope checked her watch as she pulled into the parking lot of First National Bank. 2:47 p.m. She had exactly 43 minutes before the nursing home's financial office closed, and she needed every one of those minutes to make it across town through Thursday afternoon traffic. Her mother's care facility had called that morning with an urgent request. They needed the additional payment for the specialized physical therapy equipment by close of business today, or they'd have to put Mama on a waiting list that could stretch for months. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of her mother telling her to save your money, baby, you never know when you'll need it. Here Bernice was, 34 years old, finally in a position where those savings could make a real difference. Her consulting firm had landed 3 major contracts this quarter, and for the first time in her adult life, she had a substantial emergency fund. $25,000 might seem like a fortune to some people, but to Bernice, it represented security, and now, her mother's mobility. She grabbed her leather briefcase and headed toward the bank's glass doors, her heels clicking against the pavement. She'd come straight from a client presentation, still wearing her navy blue power suit and the pearls her grandmother had left her. Professional attire had always been her armor in corporate America, but today she found herself wishing she'd had time to change into something more casual. Something that wouldn't make her stand out quite so much. The bank was quieter than usual for a Thursday afternoon. A few customers stood in the short lines, and Bernice could see the familiar faces of tellers she'd been banking with for over 5 years. She walked to the counter where withdrawal slips were kept, pulling out her Mont Blanc pen, another investment in her professional image. As she began filling out the slip, Bernice paused. $25,000 in cash was a lot of money to be walking around with, especially in broad daylight. She thought about the stories she'd heard from other successful black professionals. Friends who'd been followed in stores, questioned about their purchases, asked to provide additional identification when their white colleagues weren't. The reality of being a black woman with money in America was that your success often made you more suspicious, not less. She flipped the withdrawal slip over and wrote a brief note on the back. I need to withdraw $25,000 in cash for a medical emergency. Please handle this transaction discreetly, as I'm concerned about my safety leaving with this amount. She figured the teller would understand. Banks dealt with large cash transactions all the time, and they knew the security risks involved. Bernice approached the counter where Margaret Patterson, a teller she'd seen many times before, was finishing up with another customer. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with graying blonde hair and the kind of perpetual smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd always been polite to Bernice, but there was something in her demeanor that had always felt performative, as if she were consciously trying to appear welcoming. Next, Margaret called out, and Bernice stepped forward. Good afternoon, Margaret. I need to make a withdrawal today. Bernice handed over her ID, debit card, and the withdrawal slip. Margaret glanced at the slip, and her expression immediately changed. Her eyes narrowed as she read the amount, then flipped it over to read the note on the back. The color drained from her face, and she looked up at Bernice with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Excuse me for just a moment, Margaret said, her voice suddenly tight. She turned and walked quickly toward the back of the bank, where Bernice could see her whispering urgently to a tall, heavy-set man in a cheap suit. That would be Jerry Morrison, the assistant manager. A man Bernice had unfortunately encountered before when there had been a mix-up with her account a few months ago. He'd been condescending then, speaking to her slowly and repeatedly asking if she was sure she had the right account. Jerry's eyes immediately fixed on Bernice, and she watched as Margaret handed him the withdrawal slip. His face hardened as he read it, and Bernice felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd seen that look before. The way white people's expressions changed when they went from seeing her as non-threatening to seeing her as a problem. Jerry walked briskly toward the counter, his chest puffed out with authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter with your hands visible, please." "I'm sorry, what?" Bernice blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "Step away from the counter. Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." The bank had gone quiet. Other customers were turning to stare, and Bernice could feel the heat of embarrassment and confusion rising in her cheeks. "I don't understand. I'm just trying to make a withdrawal." "He's trying to rob the bank," Margaret announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice shrill with manufactured drama. "What? No, I'm just trying to make a withdrawal," Bernice said, her voice rising in disbelief. She couldn't believe this was happening. She'd been banking here for 5 years. They had her information, her account history, her identification. "Take one step away from the counter with your hands up." "Slowly," Jerry commanded, his hand moving towards something at his waist. Probably a panic button or security device. "I didn't do anything," Bernice protested, but she complied, raising her hands slightly and taking a step back. The last thing she needed was for this situation to escalate further. She could see other customers pulling out their phones, some probably calling 911. Others likely recording what they assumed was a bank robbery in progress. "Then what do you call this?" Jerry held up her withdrawal slip like it was evidence in a criminal trial. "It's a deposit slip for $25,000. Bernice stared at him in disbelief. "It's a withdrawal slip. For my own money. From my own account. So anyone who looks like you and dresses like that doesn't have that much money to withdraw on a whim," Jerry said, his prejudice now laid bare for everyone to hear. The words hit Bernice like a physical blow. There it was, the real reason for their suspicion. Not the note, not the amount, but the fact that she was a black woman who had the audacity to have money. "It wasn't on a whim. It's my money, and I need it for my mother's medical care. Save your excuses, okay? I wasn't born yesterday, you know," Jerry sneered. "This is clearly a robbery attempt. This is a misunderstanding. If you just let me explain." Bernice tried to keep her voice calm, professional, but she could feel her composure starting to crack. "Oh yeah, I would love for you to explain this note you sent to me," Jerry interrupted, waving the withdrawal slip in the air like a flag. "Did you write this note?" "Yes, I did, but not because I was trying to rob a bank. Because everyone who makes a withdrawal scribbles a ransom note on the back of it," Margaret chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ransom note?" Bernice looked between them in bewilderment. "I wrote that note because I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that I was going to be walking out of this bank with so much cash. It was for my own safety." But Jerry had already turned away from her, addressing the other customers and bank employees who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "It's okay, everyone. Everyone is safe now. You can't do this. I'm on a tight schedule," Bernice said, thinking of the nursing home of her mother, of the opportunity that was slipping away with each passing minute. "I'm sure that's what you told your getaway driver, but you picked the wrong bank to mess with," Jerry said with the smugness of a man who believed he'd just saved the day. "I'm not a bank robber. Margaret, take her to the back office. I'll call the police." "The police?" "Wait, no, you can't do this. I have somewhere to be." Bernice's voice was getting desperate now. She could see her entire afternoon crumbling, her mother's treatment being delayed. All because of these people's inability to see past their own prejudices. Jerry raised his voice to address the other customers again. It's all over, folks. Nothing to worry about. This is all a big misunderstanding, Bernice called out, hoping that anyone, would see the insanity of what was happening. I don't want to hear it, Jerry said dismissively. Save it for the police. Margaret had come around the counter now, her face flushed with excitement. Bernice realized that this woman was actually enjoying this. The drama, the attention, the power she felt she had over the situation. Just try to understand, Bernice pleaded one more time. I wrote that note because I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that I was going to be walking out of this bank with so much cash on me. It was only for my own safety. That's it. I swear. Listen to her, Margaret said to Jerry with a theatrical shake of her head. A liar and a thief. Why am I not surprised? You people are all the same. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You people. There it was again, the casual racism that reduced Bernice to nothing more than a stereotype, a threat, a problem to be solved rather than a human being with a legitimate need. You people, Bernice repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, don't try to twist this on me, she said, louder now, her professional composure finally cracking. I'm not the bad guy here. You're the ones who are assuming I'm a criminal based on nothing but your own prejudices. Don't try to twist this on me, Jerry interjected. I'm not the bad guy here. You're the one who tried to rob the bank. It's my money, Bernice shouted, her frustration finally boiling over. I've been banking here for 5 years. Check your records. Look at my account history. How would someone like you have $25,000? Jerry asked with a skeptical laugh. I earned it, Bernice said through gritted teeth. Really? How'd you do that? By robbing other banks. The accusation was so absurd, so insulting, that Bernice almost laughed despite herself. Go ahead and call the police, Jerry, Margaret said, pulling out her phone. I got this one covered. Bernice took a deep breath, trying to summon every ounce of dignity she had left. I happen to be one of the bank's biggest customers, despite what you may think. I'm very successful. I run my own consulting firm. I have 3 major corporate contracts. I pay more in taxes than most people make in a year. Give me a break, Jerry scoffed. What are you, 30, 35 at most? Look at how you're dressed. It's the middle of the day on a Thursday. Bernice looked down at her tailored suit, her Italian leather shoes, her grandmother's pearls. Clothes that in any other context would have signaled success and professionalism. But on her body, in this moment, they were apparently evidence of criminal intent. I'm dressed professionally because I came here straight from a business meeting, she said quietly. I'm wearing a suit that cost more than your monthly salary because I can afford it. Because I worked hard, got an education, built a business, and saved my money just like any other American. But she could see it in their eyes. They weren't listening. They had already decided who she was, what she represented, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change their minds. The police sirens were getting closer now. Bernice closed her eyes and thought about her mother, probably wondering why she hadn't called, why the payment hadn't arrived. She thought about all the times her mother had warned her about the world, about how some people would never see past the color of her skin, no matter what she achieved. Mama, she whispered to herself. I tried. As the first police officer walked through the bank's glass doors, Bernice Hope stood in the middle of First National Bank, successful, educated, accomplished, and completely powerless. The officer, a middle-aged black man with sergeant stripes, approached with a professional demeanor, his eyes taking in the scene. I'm Sergeant Williams, he said calmly, looking between Jerry, Margaret, and Bernice. I understand there's been a report of an attempted robbery? Yes, officer. Jerry stepped forward eagerly. This woman here tried to rob the bank. She handed us a threatening note demanding money. Sergeant Williams looked at Bernice, who was still standing with her hands partially raised, her dignity intact despite everything. "Ma'am, what's your version of events?" "I'm a customer here," Bernice said, her voice steady. "I've been banking here for 5 years. I came in to withdraw $25,000 from my own account for my mother's medical emergency. I wrote a note asking for discretion because I was concerned about my safety carrying that much cash." The sergeant nodded and turned to Jerry. "Have you verified her account information? Checked her identification?" Jerry shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no, but you called the police on a customer without even checking if she had an account here?" Sergeant Williams' eyebrows rose. "May I see the note in question?" Jerry reluctantly handed over the withdrawal slip. The sergeant read both sides carefully, then looked up. "This appears to be a standard withdrawal slip with a reasonable safety concern noted on the back. Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Bernice handed over her driver's license and debit card. "My account number is on the card. You can verify everything right now." Sergeant Williams walked to the teller window. "I need someone to pull up this customer's account information immediately." A younger teller, who had been watching the entire scene with growing discomfort, quickly typed in Bernice's information. Her eyes widened as she looked at the screen. "Sergeant, she's had an account here for 5 years. Her current balance is..." "Well, it's more than enough to cover a $25,000 withdrawal. She's actually one of our premium customers." The silence that followed was deafening. Jerry's face went from confident to confused to deeply embarrassed in the span of seconds. Margaret seemed to shrink behind the counter. "Furthermore," the teller continued, clearly finding her courage, "I can see regular large deposits over the past several months, all from legitimate business sources. This customer runs Hope Consulting LLC." Sergeant Williams turned back to Jerry and Margaret, his expression now stern. "So let me understand this. You called the police on a legitimate customer who was trying to withdraw her own money from her own account, without even bothering to verify her identity or account status?" She looked suspicious," Margaret stammered. "Suspicious how exactly?" the sergeant asked pointedly. The question hung in the air. Everyone in the bank knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Dr. Patricia Chun, an Asian-American woman in scrubs who had been waiting in line during the entire incident, finally spoke up. "Officer, I witnessed this entire exchange. These employees made assumptions about this woman based on her race. They specifically said, 'Anyone who looks like you doesn't have that kind of money.' They said, 'You people are all the same.' This was racial profiling, pure and simple." Several other customers nodded in agreement. An elderly white man stepped forward. "I've been banking here for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." That young lady was treated shamefully. Sergeant Williams looked around the bank, then back at Jerry. "Sir, I'm going to need you to process this customer's withdrawal immediately. And then I suggest you call your corporate headquarters, because this incident is going to require some serious addressing." Jerry's hands shook as he approached the computer terminal. "Mrs. Hope, this was a misunderstanding." "No," Bernice said firmly, her voice carrying the authority she'd spent years developing in boardrooms. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when you mishear someone or mix up paperwork. This was racial profiling. You saw a black woman asking for a large amount of money and immediately assumed I was a criminal. You didn't check my account. You didn't verify my identity. You didn't ask questions. You just decided I was guilty." The bank manager, Mr. Davidson, had finally appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion. His face went pale as he took in the scene. The police officer, the gathered customers, and the obvious tension in the air. "What's going on here?" he asked weakly. "Your employees racially profiled one of your best customers and falsely accused her of bank robbery," Sergeant Williams explained succinctly. without bothering to check her account status or identification. Mr. Davidson looked at Bernice, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Mrs. Hope? From Hope Consulting." "Yes," Bernice replied. "The same Mrs. Hope who has recommended your bank to dozens of my business clients. The same Mrs. Hope who has never missed a payment, never bounced a check, and has maintained substantial balances with you for 5 years. The withdrawal was processed in silence. $25,000 in cash, neatly bundled and placed in a bank envelope." Jerry's hands continued to shake as he counted out the bills. "Mrs. Hope," Mr. Davidson began, "I cannot begin to apologize." "You're right," Bernice interrupted, taking the envelope and placing it carefully in her briefcase. "You cannot begin to apologize. Because no apology can give me back the time I've lost, the humiliation I've endured, or the trust that's been broken." She turned to face the gathered customers. "I want everyone here to understand what just happened. I am a business owner, a taxpayer, a daughter trying to get medical care for her mother. I did everything right. I came to my own bank, presented my own identification, requested my own money, and I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin." The bank was completely silent now. Even the usual sounds of computers and phones seemed muted. "Sergeant Williams," Bernice continued, "I want to file a formal complaint, not just with the police, but with the bank's corporate office, the Better Business Bureau, and any other relevant authorities." "Absolutely, ma'am. We'll document everything." Bernice looked one last time at Jerry and Margaret. "I hope you learned something today. I hope you understand that your assumptions nearly cost an elderly woman her medical treatment and definitely cost your bank a valuable customer." She walked toward the door, then paused. "And for the record, I didn't dress suspiciously. I dressed professionally because I am a professional. The only suspicious thing here was your inability to see past your own prejudices." As Bernice left the bank, several customers followed her out, including Dr. Chun and the elderly gentleman who had spoken up for her. They offered their contact information as witnesses and their sincere apologies for what she had endured. Bernice made it to the nursing home with 10 minutes to spare. As she handed over the payment for her mother's equipment, she felt a mix of victory and exhaustion. She had been vindicated, but the cost had been her faith in basic human decency. Later that evening, as she sat beside her mother's bed, explaining what had happened, her mother took her hand. "Baby," her mother said softly, "I'm proud of how you handled yourself today. You stood up not just for yourself, but for all of us who've been judged by the color of our skin instead of the content of our character." Bernice squeezed her mother's hand. "I just wish it hadn't been necessary, Mama." "I know, baby. But sometimes the world needs to be reminded that we belong here too. That our money is just as green, our needs just as valid, and our dignity just as important as anyone else's." The next morning, Bernice's story made local news. First National Bank issued a public apology and announced mandatory diversity training for all employees. Jerry was terminated, and Margaret was suspended pending further review. But for Bernice, the real victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in the calls she received from other black professionals who shared their own similar experiences, and in knowing that by speaking up, she had made it slightly less likely that the next person who looked like her would face the same humiliation. The money had been hers all along, but proving it had cost her more than she ever should have had to pay.